All right, everybody, and we are back, finally. Sorry for the delay, no content coming out in the last several weeks, maybe even months now, but I've been enjoying this 2023 NFL season as I hope anybody out there has. It has been quite the roller coaster of a season, if I do say so myself. So, what I would like to do today is just take a look at the playoff picture now that we're in the month of December to see just how this crazy season might end, how everything is going to shake out here. So, we do have pretty much a lot of different scenarios still on the table. No teams have clinched the playoffs as of yet, and no teams have officially been eliminated in either conference yet, mathematically speaking, of course, because we do have some teams that are pretty far ahead and pretty far behind in the standings, and morally speaking, in the locker rooms of these teams, they definitely know where they stand heading into the final weeks. But we've definitely had some very high stakes matchups over the last few weeks, some very, very good high stakes matchups, and we have plenty more to come in the following weeks. So I guess we could start with the AFC. And in the AFC, the story so far this year has been pretty much, it's been a pretty even keeled conference. There really hasn't been one team pulling away like we've seen in the NFC so far this year, and there really aren't too many teams falling behind. Uh, the Basically, what I'm saying is the vast majority of these teams are in lockstep for the most part. The only teams, I guess I should say, that are really out of it at this point in time, it's definitely the New England Patriots stand out from the bunch at a 2-9 record. And this is certainly surprising considering what we were saying going into the season about New England maybe not being a playoff team, but at least putting up a fight. We didn't expect New England to make the playoffs, but New England was a team that was seen as somebody that was going to put up a fight. They were going to be at least in the hunt for a playoff spot. They'd probably be around 500 when all was said and done. And the result so far is a 2-9 record in injury-plagued offense and defense. Not that the offense really had a ton of talent to begin with, and it looks like as of right now that this will be Bill Belichick's final season in New England as we feared going into the season. And looking up at the standings here in the AFC, definitely they have some company here right in front of them, with the New York Jets right ahead of them at the number 15th spot technically, although they are in a three-way tie with the Tennessee Titans and the LA Chargers. All three of these teams at 4-7, and if I had to say right now, I don't think any of these three teams make the playoffs either, even though the seventh seed is technically within just 2 wins. Um, Man, it's been a tough year for these teams. And I do think that the Chargers, Titans, and Jets, all three of these teams, I don't think they're going to go down without a fight, unlike, say, New England. I think New England's kind of just running out the clock at this point. The Chargers do play New England this week, so that should be a game where they could get back on track, potentially be in the playoff hunt entering week 14. And then the Tennessee Titans do play at home against the divisional opponent, the Indianapolis Colts. And I am not writing off the Tennessee Titans by any means with Mike Vrabel, on the sidelines. Seems like even with a 4-7 record, seems like he does have his roster bought in. Seems like the guys in that locker room do still have their sights set on the prize of making the playoffs and making a playoff run once they get there. So we will go through these team schedules in a little bit to see the exact scenarios on where this is going to shake out after week 18, but I got my eye on Tennessee. I don't think they're necessarily out of this yet. And then, of course, the New York Jets, struck by catastrophe and tragedy in week 1 with the Aaron Rodgers injury, shaking up the entire National Football League landscape. I will say, despite Robert Saleh's best efforts, I don't think the Jets are making the playoffs. In fact, I don't think they'll even be in the top 12 probably in the AFC. They'll probably be near the bottom if I had to guess when all is said and done. But the Jets season so far has been defined by a dominant defense, one that's really built on last season very well, and their young skill position players on the offensive side of the ball, such as Garrett Wilson and Brees Hall, continuing their development as well, and they've really been hindered by poor offensive line play, poor quarterback play, and poor offensive coaching. Just a trifecta that is a recipe for disaster for sure. So continuing along, looking at our 5-win teams, we have the Cincinnati Bengals and the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, the Bengals, of course, everybody thought going into the season the Bengals were going to be one of the premier contenders in the AFC, myself included. They were my pick to win the AFC this year. But as of right now, with Joe Burrow being done for the season, unfortunately, it looks as though Cincinnati's pretty much dead in the water here. They do have a big matchup this week with the Jacksonville Jaguars in prime time, one that really should have been a high stakes matchup, perhaps a playoff preview, definitely with playoff seeding on the line, but as of right now, it looks like this game's just going to mean, I guess this game will just be relevant, I should say, for the Jacksonville Jaguars, not so much for the Cincinnati Bengals, unless perhaps they are having their sights set on another potential top draft pick, which I do have my eye on that as well in this AFC, because as deep as this conference is, we mentioned before the season that the Bengals are going to be faced with a salary cap dilemma following this season. Well, if they're able to get a top 10, maybe even a top 5 pick in this upcoming draft, maybe the Bengals could pick right up where they left off in 2024. Maybe they could have another star player walking in. And it could be at any position. I don't know who they have their sights set on in the draft, but who knows? Maybe they end up falling so far down this AFC hierarchy here where they're the 15th team and we're talking about the Bengals drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. to pair with Jamar Chase. How crazy would that be? But wishful thinking, I suppose. Well, maybe for Cincinnati fans, not so much for the rest of us. But looking at the Las Vegas Raiders, this was a season that really I didn't buy the smell test on the Raiders going into this year too much. I wasn't really much of a believer in them to begin with, but I know a lot of people did think that the Raiders could make a playoff push here, and for a while it did look like the Raiders were going to be right in the thick of this AFC playoff race, and you could argue that right now they still absolutely are with a few weeks to play here, or just over a month, I should say, to play. They are technically only 1 win behind the Indianapolis Colts for the 7th seed, and despite losing Jimmy Garoppolo to injury and eventually a benching and firing their head coach and their general manager, this team is still relevant, and while I don't think if they did make the playoffs they would be particularly relevant, it would be a nice story for the guys on the field and for that coaching staff to see them really rally around each other and make something positive out of what otherwise is seen as largely a lost season. So then now we can look at the real meat of this playoff picture, I would say, the 6-win and above teams. I would say that these 10 are really the teams that have a legitimate shot at making the playoffs, and not only making the playoffs, but if they were to make it, do some damage when they get into the playoffs. And that starts with the number 10 seed technically right now, the 6-6 Buffalo Bills, who are on their bye this week. And this has really been an unfortunate season for Buffalo. It seems like the football gods, for whatever reason, just despise the Buffalo Bills. So I don't know if it was something that Sean McDermott did, or something that Josh Allen did, or maybe it was something that the ghost of Ralph Wilson is still haunting the Buffalo Bills. I really don't know, but for whatever reason, this franchise is just destined to not have success, it would seem. But I would like to see Buffalo sneak back into this playoff picture. It would certainly make this AFC playoff race a lot more competitive, I would say, especially now that Cincinnati's out of it. Could you imagine if, say, Buffalo made it as a 7 seed or a 6 seed, and you're one of these teams up here that won their division, and your reward is to play a hungry Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills in the wild card round? How crazy would that be? But Buffalo has been playing better ball as of late. They have been a little unlucky in their results, but they do have a massive matchup next week at Arrowhead Stadium against, you could argue, their rival, the Kansas City Chiefs. Definitely always a good matchup when those two play, but Kansas City could really slam the door on Buffalo's playoff hopes with a win this week, or at the very least, slam the door on Buffalo's chances of really climbing back into this top four position here with a division victory. If they were to lose next week, you could pretty much all but write off them surpassing Miami for the AFC East crown. Wouldn't officially rule it out, not mathematically ruled out, but a loss next week would definitely have their backs against the wall, and you're probably talking wild card if they do make the playoffs, which I think is probably the reality they're looking at right now anyways, even with a win in Kansas City. But looking at these other two teams here, the Denver Broncos and Houston Texans, two more teams that are definitely trending in the right direction. Denver started off abysmal this year. They started 0-3 after losing 70-0 to the Miami Dolphins, and then followed that up by starting 1-4 after 5 weeks. But Denver has rallied. They've won 5 of their last 6. They're currently with a winning record here at 6-5 as we flip the calendar to December. And this is around where I thought Denver would be heading into the season. I did expect them to be definitely in the playoff mix. I anticipated they'd likely be third in the AFC West behind the Chargers and Chiefs, with the Raiders as the fourth team. But as of right now, Denver is the number 2 team in the AFC West. And it looks like as of right now, they kind of control their own destiny to get to the playoffs. If they can just string together a few wins here to end the season, keep the Chargers at an arm's length, keep the Raiders at an arm's length, I think some of these teams ahead of them here will kind of do the dirty work for them, and drop some key games to let the Broncos or one of these other teams into the playoffs. And frankly, I would expect all three of these teams to be able to make it to a wild card positioning: the Texans, Broncos, and Bills. But of course, there are 3 teams standing in their way, which we will get to in a second. But have to mention the Houston Texans, and what a fun story these guys have been this year. I have to say, they are one of my favorite teams to watch this year. Just from a neutral point of view, really don't have much of a stake in the Houston Texans or the AFC really at all. But man, CJ Stroud, he's going to have a bright future if he can figure out the mental aspect of the National Football League game, because he clearly has the physical gifts. He has the leadership gifts. He's that guy. He's him, if as the kids would say. But I do think the Houston Texans have a very bright future ahead of them, and I was pretty bullish on the Houston Texans coming into this season. I thought they were definitely going to surprise some people, but wow, they're really in a spot this week with a massive game at home against the Denver Broncos, who are right there with them on the doorstep of the playoffs here. With a victory here, Houston could put themselves in a great position to maybe seal the deal here over the next few weeks and end up making the playoffs. Who would have seen that coming? Going from really one game away from being the worst team in football last year to turning it around and being in the playoffs the very next year. That is how you rebuild a franchise on the fly, because they certainly have their foundation set for the future. So looking at our playoff teams as of right now, and another fun story in the AFC South is the 7th seed, the Indianapolis Colts. And this was a team I thought would be largely out of the mix this year. I thought they would probably be the last place team in the AFC South. And they've really impressed, whether it's their defense or Shane Steichen as his first year as a head coach, or before he was injured, Anthony Richardson. But obviously the big story being Anthony Richardson, their rookie quarterback, out for the season. Unlike the Texans, who have CJ Stroud locked and loaded, ready to go, the Colts have been riding with Gardner Minshew. So they take the Eagles' offensive coordinator from last season and their backup quarterback. So essentially, their second in-line head coach and their second in-line quarterback from last season off of that 2022 Eagles roster. They have them become their head coach and starting quarterback. And what do you know? They have a 6-5 record. And I do know Jonathan Taylor is out this week and he might be out for the foreseeable future, but Zach Moss was looking pretty good earlier this year when Jonathan Taylor wasn't in the lineup, so would not be surprised at all if the Indianapolis Colts continue to rally. This is another massive matchup this week for both of these teams, the Colts and the Titans. The Colts can really slam the door on the Titans season with a win here to drop them to 4-8, kind of crush their playoff hopes, but if the Titans win this matchup, not only are they right behind the Colts at 5-7, and the Colts would be 6-6, but it opens the door wide open for Houston, the winner of the Houston and Denver game. Whoever would win that would then jump into the playoffs, and then Buffalo sitting right there at 6-6 on their bye week. They're waiting to come back in next week against Kansas City, and they could also jump into this playoff positioning here with a potential Colts loss to the Titans. So if you're on the side of anarchy, maybe you're rooting for the Tennessee Titans this week, and definitely seems like that would shake things up in this playoff picture. So I just might be rooting for the Titans despite how great of a story the Colts have been. And then moving along here, we have the Cleveland Browns and Pittsburgh Steelers at 7 wins, 2 AFC North teams, and these two teams have definitely been about their defense this season. Both of these teams have had dominant defenses led by edge rushers. Pick your poison, TJ Watt, Myles Garrett, two of the finest defensive football players in today's game, and they have really shown why this year. Cleveland has had a flurry of unfortunate injuries on the offensive side of the football, whether it was Jack Conklin or Nick Chubb, more recently Deshaun Watson, Amari Cooper getting banged up a little bit. It's just been one thing after another with these guys, and despite all of it, they're still sitting here at 7-4 after 12 weeks, and they themselves have a big matchup with the Los Angeles Rams this week at SoFi Stadium. And when we get to the NFC, we'll see with the Rams that Los Angeles is a team that they're trying to sneak into that NFC playoff picture, and this is going to be a massive game for them as well. So this is that point in the season where the rubber's starting to meet the road, and you're going to see some teams play some desperate football. We already saw that last week with Buffalo going into Philadelphia, where despite the Eagles being 9-1 going into that game, Buffalo had their backs against the wall, and you could tell they were playing with a purpose, and they needed that win. And I'm fully expecting to see that this week with a lot of these teams, whether it's the Titans and the Colts going at it in a divisional matchup, whether it's the Chargers trying to just lay their foot on the gas against the New England Patriots, whether it's the Texans and Broncos going at it in a potential shootout this week, whether it is the Cleveland Browns going up against the Los Angeles Rams. We certainly have an exciting slate of games this weekend. And then for Pittsburgh, while they haven't had nearly as many injuries as the Cleveland Browns, they've been just playing very sound fundamental football. They've been doing all the little things right. They've been playing great situational football. They seem very aware of the given down, the given scenario, the given task at hand. And despite the fact that Kenny Pickett has looked pretty pedestrian in his second year, I would say it's a sophomore slump, but he really didn't have a very impressive rookie campaign either, so maybe this just is what Kenny Pickett is at this point. If you recall back to my videos in the preseason, I did draw plenty of parallels between the Steelers and Patriots in terms of having a pretty well-built roster with an unproven young quarterback, very successful veteran head coaches, and so far this year, New England, they've been hampered with injuries, and looks like Bill Belichick's on his way out, while Mike Tomlin is thriving, and it looks like he is really doing his finest work ever with the Pittsburgh Steelers here. despite the fact that Kenny Pickett hasn't been overly better than Mac Jones. I mean, Mac Jones has been probably the worst quarterback in the league this year, if not one of the worst quarterbacks in the league. But Kenny Pickett hasn't exactly been a superstar quarterback, and Mike Tomlin's been able to rally his personnel to a 7-4 record. And it looks like with their schedule coming up, as we'll see in a little bit, if there's one of these three wildcard teams right now I had to choose to make the playoffs, I think it's the Pittsburgh Steelers. I do think it is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Currently with a 3-1 divisional record. How can you argue with that? And have to say that with the Bengals too, their 0-4 divisional record. Forgot to mention that. Two of those were with Joe Burrow, or I'm sorry, three of those were with Joe Burrow. So if you weren't writing off the Cincinnati Bengals already, that is definitely some fuel for that fire. Although you can't ever write anybody off in the National Football League. We should know this by this point in 2023. Anything is possible, except maybe the Patriots coming back. I think their season's probably done. But anybody else here, I think it's completely fair game. Then looking at our division leaders as of right now, I think these are probably the four teams that feel the best about their playoff chances as of right now. I don't see any serious threats to overtake any of these teams for their respective divisions, at least in this point in time. Miami, I would say, is probably the weakest of these four teams, and that's really just because as great as Miami's offense looks on a given week, when they're beating Denver 70-0 in week 3 and Tyreek Hill's running all over the field and Tua Tagovailoa's throwing for 300-400 yards, that's all fine and good, but when they end up playing a team like Kansas City in the playoffs or Baltimore in the playoffs, are they going to be able to come out with the win? That's really what everybody needs the answer to right now. And it seems like as of right now, Miami's a fine team. They'll probably win the AFC East. There's an outside chance Buffalo could come back and overtake them here. Buffalo did win their first head-to-head matchup, but Miami probably wins this AFC South. They probably are hosting a wild card game in South Florida. Probably a win at that if it's against the Pittsburgh Steelers, I would say. I think Miami's certainly capable of defeating Pittsburgh if that does end up being the matchup. But in a potential round 2 matchup where they have to go to Baltimore or to Arrowhead Stadium, I don't know about that. So I think Miami does make the playoffs, but how far they get in the playoffs, that's yet to be seen. Jacksonville now, if we're looking at another Florida team in the playoffs here with 8 wins, I think they also win their division, kind of running away. And while they have had some injury concerns of their own, Cam Robinson currently out missing some time even after he missed the start of the season due to suspension. I think Jacksonville is still in a very good position heading down the stretch here in December. I definitely think they're going to win the AFC South. I don't really see Houston or Indianapolis or Tennessee overtaking them. There was a chance Houston could have before last week's matchup with the Jaguars, but the Jaguars kind of pumped the brakes on any talk of Houston winning the AFC South with a win last week. But definitely intrigued to see how far Jacksonville would end up going in the playoffs. Would love to see Jaguars-Texans Part 3 in the wild card round. Hey, that'd be pretty cool, but I think Jacksonville's a team that could definitely win at least a playoff round like they did last year, and depending on the second round matchup, I think they might even be able to surprise some people and win that too. But if we're talking about the Jaguars winning the AFC outright in the playoffs, I'm not sure about that either, because if we're talking about them going into Kansas City or into Baltimore, and remember, the Chiefs do have a tiebreaker over the Jaguars and the Dolphins due to a head-to-head advantage. I just have a tough time imagining the Jaguars or Dolphins going into Arrowhead and defeating the Chiefs, despite what Doug Peterson or Tyreek Hill or Trevor Lawrence or anybody else has to say about it. I don't see that outcome happening, but Looking at these top two teams, the Chiefs and Ravens, the Ravens are on bye this week, so definitely a chance for the Chiefs, Jaguars, and Dolphins to all catch up at 9-3. The Chiefs and Ravens do not play each other this year, so this will ultimately come down to the conference record as a tiebreaker. Which as of right now, Kansas City does hold the advantage there. And Kansas City does have a pretty favorable schedule coming down the stretch here. They play at Lambeau Field on Sunday night this week. Patrick Mahomes' first game at Lambeau Field. Very exciting stuff. And then we do have a big Chiefs-Bills matchup next week on national TV at a 4:25 slot, so that'll certainly be a good one. But beyond that, Kansas City really doesn't have too many tests the rest of the way. And I think they'll end up at the very least the 2 seed, potentially even the 1 seed, because Baltimore has a pretty difficult schedule to end out the season, and that includes matchups against both the Jaguars and the Dolphins. So definitely possible that either of these Florida teams could defeat the Ravens and maybe overtake them in the standings, but as of right now, if I had to make a projection, I would say Kansas City probably ends up with the 1 seed yet again. And we're talking about the AFC going through Arrowhead Stadium yet again, perhaps for the 6th straight time in the AFC Championship. How unprecedented would that be? I remember when the Patriots from 2011 to 2018 had 8 straight AFC Championship appearances. And I thought that was just the most mind-blowing thing I had ever seen. I thought there's no way any other team in the National Football League would ever do something similar to that in the foreseeable future, because with how much parity's in the game today, there's just no way that one team could get that far that consistently. And when New England got to that 8th AFC Championship appearance, it was against the Kansas City Chiefs, and it springboarded their own streak with now 5 straight AFC Championships, potentially a 6th this year, all at home, which New England could not say for their 8th straight. So perhaps an even more impressive feat there. Definitely have to keep an eye on that one. So I guess we can look at the AFC schedules the rest of the way. I might end up just breaking this up into 2 different videos for the AFC and NFC, just for time's sake. As much as I'd love to just talk about this all day, I don't think anybody out there wants to sit here for over an hour listening to me talk about the NFL playoff picture. And hey, if you do, there'll be 2 videos. You could just click on the other one. Just break it up into nice bite-sized pieces for you. Or maybe some small meal pieces, I don't know. But anyways, we can look at the schedules here. And as of right now, this is the current standings for Week 13. As we can see, Dallas already with their victory over Seattle on a very thrilling Thursday night matchup, if anybody did not see that. But for the sake of this exercise, we won't fill out the NFC portion of this. I will fill out the AFC side, and suppose we can make some calls on these interconference matchups. We'll just have to keep them consistent when we do the NFC projections here as well. So looking at this AFC side for this week, and boy, we have some good ones here, as we mentioned a little bit ago. I'll start with the easier ones. I think the Chargers should be able to beat the Patriots in New England. Like we said, the Patriots are just kind of a dead team walking at this point. They have their sights set beyond 2023. Definitely think there's going to be some shakeup in Foxborough. Bob Kraft, not a happy man at all. And I think the league actually did him a favor in a couple weeks with... we'll get there in a couple weeks, actually. I'll discuss that when we get there. But looking at the rest of these matchups, Colts-Titans, I'm going to go with the Titans here. I do think that the Titans are going to rally this week and come out with a win. Even if they don't end up making the playoffs, they'll at least relish the opportunity to, one, take the Indianapolis Colts out of the playoff picture for at least 1 week and keep their own playoff hopes alive with a 5-7 record. So I like Tennessee at home. I do think that the Colts won their first matchup. I can double check that real quick. So the Colts did win that first matchup. So I don't really see the Colts sweeping the Titans. I think Tennessee does take this game. Then we have, man, if Joe Burrow was healthy, this would be a chef's kiss Monday night matchup between the Bengals and Jaguars. This would have been an absolute perfect game to end this week on, but this one's the Jags now that Joe Burrow's out. Don't really think there's much to argue there. And then we have this big time matchup between the Broncos and Texans in Houston. And man, I could really see this one going either way. This is probably the most coin flip of a game this week, I would say. And that honestly might include the Eagles and 49ers, which we're not going to project right now, but man, this Texans Broncos game is going to be tough, but it's in Houston. Texans are the home team, and you know what? We'll ride with CJ Stroud. We'll give the Texans the nod here, at least for this week. They came off of a tough loss last week. I think they'll rebound well. This is going to be a really good game, though. I can feel it. And then looking at these interconference matchups, I'll take Miami over Washington, Pittsburgh over Arizona, Atlanta over the Jets, the Chiefs over the Packers, and then I'll give the Rams the nod over the Browns. As much as that is unfortunate for Cleveland, I do think that the Rams are going to be very hungry this week as well. So on the AFC side, after Week 13, this is how our standings shake out. We'd still have the Chiefs. The Chiefs would propel themselves to the number 1 seed with a win. The Jaguars would go up to number 2. The Dolphins would be number 3. So actually the Baltimore Ravens would technically fall to the 4 seed just by the nature of the Dolphins, Jaguars, and Chiefs winning this week. That's all it takes for the Ravens to go from 1 to 4. So we have a very neck and neck race there at the top of the AFC. So looking at Week 14, and we start off with this Thursday night matchup between 2 Hall of Fame head coaches, 2 of the most prestigious organizations in the National Football League, the Patriots and Steelers. Not much to debate there. We'll go with the Steelers. This Patriots season just keeps getting uglier. Jaguars against the Browns. I'll go Jags here, so we're starting to see the Browns really in a vulnerable position. This potentially opens the door up for some other teams to jump into the mix here in the wild card race, and that's exactly what the Houston Texans are going to do with a win over the Jets. And so will the Indianapolis Colts if they can defeat the Cincinnati Bengals, which I believe they will. Then we have a few good ones down here, actually, to wrap things up in the AFC. Chiefs, Bills, with the Bills coming off of the bye week. I might just give this one to Buffalo. Buffalo is going to be a very desperate team coming into Kansas City. And the Chiefs know they're going to have to win this game too. They know it's the toughest test they're going to have down the stretch. They know they could slam the door on Buffalo's playoff hopes, but this one's going to be a barn burner. I already know that. It always is when these two teams play each other, and I'll give the nod to Buffalo, but that is definitely a coin flip for sure. Then we have a divisional matchup, AFC West, between the Broncos and Chargers. This one really could be a big one because if the Chargers were to win this, both teams would be 6-7, but if the Broncos win this, they would stay alive in the AFC playoff hunt, whereas the Chargers at 5-8, they would be all but out of it at that point. And I think unfortunately for the Chargers, that might just be the reality. I don't see the Broncos losing back-to-back weeks. And if they do lose to the Texans this week, I would then have them defeating the Chargers next week in back-to-back road games. So definitely not the easiest schedule coming up for the Broncos, it would seem. Then on Monday night next week, we have the Titans against the Miami Dolphins. And this could be the game, again, like this week with the Titans. Pretty much every game is a must-win game for them. But I will give the nod to Miami here. Maybe Miami can feel a little bit better about themselves beating a well-coached team like the Titans, but I don't think the pundits will stop talking about how Miami can't seem to beat the really good teams, even with this win, because Tennessee hasn't been a really good team this year, and that's just the facts. So then just two interconference matchups. Ravens coming off of the bye against the Rams. And man, both of these teams are going to need this one as well. The Ravens for playoff seeding and the Rams just to get into the playoffs. I got to give it to the Ravens, though. They're just the better team. And then the Vikings against the Raiders, I'll give that one to Minnesota. So then moving on to Week 15, our AFC standings, we have Jacksonville as your 1 seed, Miami as the 2 seed, Baltimore as the 3 seed, and then Kansas City going all the way down to the 4 seed. So now in Week 15, Chargers Raiders on a Thursday night. I will give the Chargers the rebound win here. The Steelers facing off against the Colts on a Saturday. This could be a very competitive game, maybe a low scoring game perhaps, but you know what? I'll give this one to... Man, this could be a tough one. I'll go with the Steelers. I think this could go either way though. I'll lean Steelers as of right now. I do think Mike Tomlin's just going to have these guys ready to go. And that Steelers defense might just be a little bit too much for this Colts offense, especially if Jonathan Taylor is still out. Then we have the Jets versus Dolphins rematch from that Black Friday Classic. We know how this goes, Dolphins. Then moving on, we have the Texans against the Tennessee Titans. And man, Tennessee could keep their playoff hopes alive with a win here, but I think CJ Stroud has other plans, and this would officially make it so the Titans could not catch up to the Texans in the standings if the Texans were to win this, should this be how the schedule shakes out. And you know what, before we finish these up, I'll jump over to the interconference matchups because these ones will be a little bit easier. I'll go Browns over Bears, and then Lions and Broncos. Maybe these aren't easier. Lions and Broncos, that could be a tough one. The Broncos at 7-6. Another road game for the Broncos. So they're going to have 3 straight road games coming up. I'll give it to Detroit. So Denver's going to be at 7-7. And then Minnesota against Cincinnati. I'll give it to Minnesota. Dallas against Buffalo. Man, that could be a really good one too. Because Dallas is going to need that to stay alive in the divisional race, but Buffalo needs that just to get into the playoffs. But you know what? It's in Buffalo in December. I'll go with the Bills, but this could be a great one between Dak Prescott and Josh Allen. Both of them have looked, in my opinion, great this year. I know people have had some criticism of Josh Allen's performance, but I think given what he has around him this year, given the circumstances for the Bills, I think he's playing tremendously. I think he hasn't really missed a beat otherwise. He's still every bit the player that we know he can be. Then Sunday night, this one's a heavyweight between the Ravens and the Jaguars. This one would be for first place in the AFC, I believe, if for whoever wins this. And this one is down in Duval against down Duval County at home for the Jaguars against the Ravens. Man, you know what? I'll lean with the Jaguars just for the home field advantage sake. I'll lean with the Jaguars, but this could be bravo on the schedule maker's part putting this one Sunday night because this could be a really good one. And then this one's listed as a Monday night, but this game actually just got flexed out. The first time a Monday night game has ever been flexed out. So it'll actually be the Eagles and the Seahawks who play Monday night, not the Chiefs and the Patriots. But Chiefs are going to win this one. I think we know this, even if it is 1 o'clock. And this is what I was alluding to earlier with Bob Kraft. I think the league just kind of did him a solid here. Maybe Bob Kraft made a call to the commissioner's office and said, hey, maybe you don't want to have us play Patrick Mahomes on national television against this team. I'd like to have a little bit of dignity left. I think Bill would like to have a little bit of dignity left before he ends this Hall of Fame run. So they moved this one to the 1 o'clock window, save the Patriots a little bit of humility. So after 15 weeks, Jaguars is the 1 seed, Dolphins is the 2 seed, Chiefs is the 3 seed, the Steelers would actually be the 4 seed over the Baltimore Ravens. And then the Ravens as a wild card at number 5. Could you even believe that? The Baltimore Ravens, currently the 1 seed, now a wild card. With the other wild cards being the Houston Texans and Cleveland Browns. So, on to week 16. We have Steelers against the Bengals. Steelers staying in that driver's seat in the AFC North with a 4-1 divisional record. Bills against the Chargers. Bills staying in the AFC playoff picture. And man, this could really get ugly for the Los Angeles Chargers. Have to wonder what their future holds. We know Brandon Staley is pretty much done. Like he's going to be gone, right? Like that first Monday after week 18. Black Monday, should we say. But what coach will they bring in? What kind of identity will the Chargers have going forward? Keenan Allen's getting up there in age. Austin Eckler's going to be due for a substantial pay raise. Mike Williams going to be recovering from yet another injury. Veterans on defense like Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, they're not getting any younger. Be interested to see how that team looks going forward, especially if this season ends up being as much of a disappointment as it looks like it's going to be right now. So then we have the Browns and the Texans, two teams in wild card positioning currently. Give that one to the Texans. They might put a nice little run together here. And that would boot the Browns out of the playoffs for the Buffalo Bills. So, man, Buffalo, they string together a few wins over some tough teams here. They could really get a full head of steam going into these playoffs, which, look out if that's the case. If Buffalo starts beating some of these good teams here and they get some momentum going into the playoffs, watch out. That's all I'm saying. Just watch out for what happens next. So then we have the Patriots and the Broncos. Finally, Broncos get a home game. We'll give them the nod. And then the Chiefs getting a Monday night matchup against the Raiders. So that's interesting. The league, I guess, scheduled... Is it? Okay, this isn't Monday night. This is a Christmas Day game. I was going to say, it's kind of odd on the league's part to schedule the Chiefs on back-to-back Monday night games, but that makes more sense now. Then at the interconference games, I'll throw the Jets a bone, give them a win over Washington. Colts versus the Falcons. This one could definitely be competitive, but I'll give the Colts the nod here. Seahawks and the Titans. I'll lean with the Seahawks. And then, especially if the Titans are already at 9 losses, they might just be throwing in the towel at that point. I do think right now, though, in Week 13, Tennessee absolutely sees themselves as still in the playoff race. Then the Florida matchup here between the Jaguars and Bucks. We'll go Jags. Then we have the Cowboys and the Dolphins. That could definitely be a good one. And this could be a nice measuring stick game for the Dolphins to really say if, hey, we can beat a good team. You know, we've seen the media hype around the Cowboys all season. Well, look what we just did against them. But I don't know. I don't know if they could pull it off. And the Cowboys going down to South Florida. The weather's going to be good. Home field advantage isn't really going to be too much of a factor, I would think. Maybe Dallas sneaks this one out. Give the edge to Dallas here. And then Baltimore against San Fran on a Monday night. And man, I think, and this is Christmas night, I think San Fran wins this. So Baltimore, we know they have a tough schedule. But now Baltimore is staring down the barrel of a 5 seed here with a 10-5 record, and our AFC standings after 16 weeks. Jaguars as the 1 seed, Chiefs as the 2 seed, Dolphins at 3, Steelers at 4, then Ravens, Texans, Bills as your wild cards. I'm loving how this is shaping up. This could be a really, really exciting finish and bleed right into an even more thrilling playoffs. So now week 17, the Jets against the Browns, and I'll give that one to the Browns. The Colts against the Raiders, go Colts. Ravens against the Dolphins. So if we recall back to last year in week 2, this was a very thrilling matchup where the Ravens choked away a very large lead against the Miami Dolphins, but Baltimore, I think, is going to, especially if Baltimore has a few losses here, they're going to be hungry here. And Miami coming off of a loss last week, as we saw against Dallas, or a potential loss, this could really hurt them in the AFC hierarchy. It would put both teams 11-5. It would give Baltimore the tiebreaker, so perhaps Baltimore could end up clawing their way back to at least a 3 seed, maybe even a little bit more. Buffalo against New England, we'll go Buffalo. Tennessee against Houston. I know it seems like I'm giving Houston a lot of wins here, but this schedule really isn't that difficult for them. So definitely could be exciting to see them in the playoffs. Chiefs versus Bills on New Year's Eve. This wasn't the great matchup it was hyped up to be, of the matchup between Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow for the 5th time. So we'll go Chiefs here because Joe Burrow is out, unfortunately. And then Chargers against the Broncos. Man, so I want to go Broncos here because they're at home, but that would put the Chargers at 6-10. And I remember when we did the season projections before the season, and there'd be some of these teams like the Steelers where I'm like, well, the Steelers have a good record, but I don't know if they'll actually have that good of a record. And the Texans have a better record than I thought. Will they actually have that good of a record? And like New England has kind of a bad record, and the Giants have a bad record. Will they really have a bad record? Maybe the Chargers do just end up having a 6-10 record, which definitely was wrong about the Chargers. I know they lost a lot of close games, but certainly a far cry from the original. Geez, what would I have them projected to go? I had them either 13-4 or 14-3 before the season, and that one looks horrible. Definitely one of the cold takes I had, but feeling good about some of these other teams. I definitely feel good about the Texans and Miami, the Steelers, the Browns. But anyway, let's keep it going here. Jaguars against the Panthers, an easy one, and then Steelers against the Seahawks. That could be a tough one. I'll lean the Seahawks, go especially with Seattle at home. So then, entering the last week of the regular season, we have the Jaguars at 13-3 as the 1 seed, the Chiefs at 2, the 2nd seed at a 12-4 record, the Steelers as your 3 seed at 11-5, then the Dolphins as your 4 seed also at 11-5, then the Ravens, Texans, and Bills as your wild cards at 11-5, 11-5, and 10-6 respectively. So then the final week, no interconference matchups, just straight AFC, all divisional matchups. And let's just settle this once and for all. We'll go Jets. Oh, wow, so Buffalo could have a chance to win this division here with this. And if this is how things shake out, I think they do just that. Buffalo climbs back into the 4 seed with an AFC East division victory for the 4th straight season at an 11-6 record. Then we have another one for the division between the Ravens and Steelers. Could absolutely see either of these games getting flexed Sunday night. Ravens and Steelers, I gotta go Ravens there. Ravens end up taking the division. Browns and Bengals, gotta go Browns. Texans against the Colts. You know what? I'll give it to the Colts. They'll probably need to. Well, I guess they're out at that point, but we'll still give it to the Colts anyway. Jaguars against the Titans. Maybe we'll go Titans here because the Jags just have this locked up. Or you know what? They wouldn't have it locked up because the Chiefs could pass them still. So we'll give it to the Jags and Chiefs, respectively. Then the Broncos over the Raiders. So there's our final AFC playoff picture. The Jaguars as your 1 seed with a 14-3 record. The Chiefs as your 2 seed with a 13-4 record. The Ravens are your 3 seed at 12-5. The Bills are your 4th seed at 11-6. Then we have your wild cards as the Texans, Steelers, and Dolphins, respectively, all at 11-6. So then what would that mean for the playoffs? We would have a first round of Texans at Bills, Steelers at Ravens in back-to-back weeks. I believe that was at Baltimore last week. Yeah, so we would have Steelers going into M&T Bank back-to-back weeks, and then Tyreek Hill finally making his return to Arrowhead because for some reason the league decided to make that game in Germany this year. How do I see this shaking out? I'll go Buffalo, Kansas City, and Baltimore. And I know that's cliche and predictable, but man, if Buffalo gets rolling like we saw here, let's pull up Buffalo's schedule real quick. So going from week 13 on their bye week, if they come out of the bye, geez, I have Buffalo winning out. I didn't even realize that. But if they win out, if they beat the Chiefs, Cowboys, Chargers, Patriots, and Dolphins to end the season, I really wouldn't be surprised if that's how it went. I really wouldn't. And if that's the case, like I said, look out because they're going to be a force in the playoffs. And nothing against the Texans here and CJ Stroud, but they, unlike the Bills, have a pretty weak schedule down the stretch. We could pull that up real quick. So they go Broncos, Jets, Titans, Browns, Titans, Colts. Yeah, I don't know. Not bad teams in there, obviously, but it's no Bills schedule. And the Bills have that playoff pedigree. CJ Stroud's playing amazing this year, but we know what Josh Allen's capable of too. So I got to go Buffalo. Then Baltimore over Pittsburgh. Think that one's pretty clear cut and dry. I think Baltimore is just the better team than Pittsburgh. Definitely just as well coached of a team as Pittsburgh. Honestly, John Harbaugh and Mike Tomlin might be. I mean, I know Andy Reid gets all the accolades, and so does Bill Belichick for being like the veteran coaches, but these two guys are both right there in terms of that. They both are always have their teams competitive year in and year out. So then moving on to the divisional round, we would get Baltimore at Kansas City and Buffalo at Jacksonville. Wow. So this is really interesting. So we finally get Patrick Mahomes versus Lamar Jackson in the playoffs, which I do think, even if this isn't how it shakes out, we will get that matchup in the playoffs at some point this year. Whether it's like we see here in the divisional round or if it's in the conference championship game. I think we do see a Chiefs-Ravens head-to-head matchup. And if I had to make a call on this one, wow, I guess I gotta go with the Chiefs, right? Because they're the home team. They've had all that playoff experience, that defense. I know the Ravens have a great defense too, but that Chiefs defense is right there with them. And then honestly, this Bills Jaguars game might be even harder to predict because the Bills are just rolling at this point, and they're going up against a Jacksonville team that had a pretty weak schedule down the stretch, if I remember correctly. So they go Bengals, Browns, Ravens, Bucks, Panthers, Titans. So yeah, besides that Ravens game, they really don't have much of a challenge there. Man, so do I dare give Buffalo the upset? Like that's the tricky part because I'm gonna sit here on December 2nd and say that the 6-6 Bills are gonna be in the AFC Championship. But you know what? I have seen crazier things happen in the National Football League. I will give it to the Bills. I've heard people make comparisons with the 2020 Tampa Bay Buccaneers, how they were 6-6 when they played the Chiefs in the regular season, and then they just won every game after that. Would not be surprised if we see something similar with the Bills, and that would set up a Chiefs Bills AFC Championship game at Arrowhead for the sixth straight year, the AFC Championship game. And you know what? I might just give it to Buffalo. I might just give it to Buffalo. If Buffalo's rolling like that and they're on a mission, because then it's such a weird thing though. Because on one hand, if this is how it plays out, by this point in time, by the time we get to the AFC Championship game, it's going to be a no-brainer. Buffalo would have the momentum. But it does seem kind of silly sitting here in week 13 saying, yeah, the Bills are just going to win out until February for like the next 2 months. But who knows? If they play how they did against the Eagles last week, against some of these other teams they have coming up, would not be surprised at all. So there you have it. Did the Buffalo Bills end up winning the AFC? Or am I just crazy? Is it the Jaguars? Is it the Chiefs again? Is it Baltimore? Was I too hard on Baltimore? Guess let me know down below. This seems like good a place as any to end it, and I know this has gone on for a little while now, but I'll try to do the same thing today with the NFC side of things, and get that video up before the games tomorrow. So thank you anybody who watching out there, and have fun watching those Week 13 matchups tomorrow. There's certainly going to be some good ones. And let me know your thoughts on this AFC playoff picture down below. I would definitely love to hear them. All right, and have a nice day, everybody. That's all I got.